Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for tuning into this presentation today. My name is Emma Davis. I recently graduated from the University of Delaware this past May from the Fashion and Apparel Studies program. I was a fashion merchandising major, but I am now an assistant buyer for Burlington Stores, where I've been for roughly 2 months. And then also listed on the slide is Dr. Sheng Liu. He is an associate professor at the university in the Fashion and Apparel Studies department. And we partnered together on a study titled Which Apparel Sourcing Factors Matter, which is what I'm going to be taking you through today. So for the content of this presentation, we're going to start off with a little bit of background into sourcing, which will lead us into our research question, as well as some literature that we referenced on the topic, and then the method and what we actually did to conduct the research, the results and the discussion of our findings, and then the implications and future research agendas that we can use to extend upon what we learned. So for a little bit of background that really inspired and incited our research, the sourcing formula today is truly misunderstood. It's not just about chasing the lowest production cost anymore. There are so many different factors that fashion brands and retailers are taking into account when developing their sourcing strategies and making decisions. So some of those include the speed to market, the flexibility and agility, risk of social compliance, environmental compliance, and the list really just goes on and on and on. So because of that, we were really interested in sort of pitting these factors against each other and seeing if there was maybe one that was more influential or one that was weighted a little more heavily, and then what the trade-offs were of prioritizing one over the other, which is something that we really didn't find in any of the existing literature on sourcing. And that's what we identified as some of the research gaps. One, which sourcing factors are more or less important in companies' apparel sourcing decisions? And then two, how do fashion companies make that trade-off among these sourcing factors? So this leads into our research objective, which is to quantitatively evaluate the influence of primary sourcing factors on fashion companies' determination of apparel sourcing destinations. To boil that down a little bit more, we aimed to link sourcing performance with sourcing value so that we could determine which factor or factors was the most influential. In terms of the study significance, we really see academic and application value here. In terms of academia, it really helps to fill research gaps and enhance our understanding of fashion companies' sourcing criteria and behaviors. But then on the application side, it's really going to help apparel exporting countries understand what they can do and where they should be investing their resources and their money to become a preferred sourcing destination and a bit more competitive overall. So when looking at other studies, it taught us that companies do consider perceived benefits and perceived costs when deciding whether or not they should create their own products or outsource to other countries. Some of the benefits that we found in other studies were low sourcing cost, fast delivery, the good quality of products, and access to new markets. In terms of the risks, though, on the other hand, you have complying with labor or environmental regulations, political instability, and supply chain disruptions that are caused by trade barriers. This is something that we're seeing a lot today in the landscape, so definitely a hot topic. But then when it came to which sourcing factor was the most important, that's where we were really falling short. There were a couple of studies like the ones listed up here on this slide that focused maybe on one specific factor like sustainability or geographic location, or maybe a combination of a couple like the one you're seeing with labor cost and production costs. But there wasn't a consensus here, and we weren't seeing any kind of comparison or relationship or how these factors intertwine and, sort of translate into company sourcing strategies. So not only that, but we also weren't seeing anything that linked these factors to sourcing volume. That was remaining unclear. That was what we really tried to sort of fill in conducting our research. So as of what we did, we referenced industry data source Global Data to compile information about the world's 27 largest apparel exporters' performance against 15 indicators. So you're seeing on the bottom right-hand side, this is one of the sourcing scorecards from Global Data. It's put together by industry experts who rate each of the country's performance on these 15 indicators according to a 5-point scale. So 1 means the least competitive and 5 is the most competitive. And that's really where we started out. From there, we conducted an exploratory factor analysis to consolidate the 15 performance factors that were originally provided by global data into 5 principal sourcing factors. We did this because we saw a lot of overlap in the different things that they listed out as indicators, and we wanted to make the material as digestible as possible. So what we kind of grouped together were capacity, which is the ability to provide apparel products and other value-added services, also takes into account lead time. Secondly, we have price and tariff, so any of the financial implications of sourcing from a certain region. Then stability, this encompasses political and financial stability. Sustainability, so that has to do with social and environmental compliance. And then lastly, quality. So what kind of access do these countries have to skilled laborers, and what does the overall product quality look like? Next, we conducted a multiple regression analysis, which looked at how the 5 factors affected the value of apparel exports in 2019 from the 27 countries that we studied, both globally and across these 3 regions listed, so the US, EU, and Asia. And if you're wondering why we honed in on these specific regions, they together accounted for more than 80% of world apparel imports in 2019, which is the year that we were pulling data from. And all of our trade data came from UN Comtrade. Just to note as well, the regression models were statistically significant at the 99% confidence level. So the results, the descriptive analysis, or more of the qualitative findings here, we kind of narrowed down into 3 key takeaways. The first is that no sourcing destination is perfect, and that was something that we expected going into this. That there were going to be some countries that were really proficient in certain criteria, but then maybe some lower performers in others. But we did interestingly enough find that Vietnam received ratings of 4 or 5 across the 5 factors that we grouped together. So if we were to identify a strongest performer, it would have been Vietnam, according to the findings of this study. Secondly, fashion brands and retailers have a lot of choices for sourcing destinations that meet their needs for capacity, price, and quality. So a lot of suppliers are really competitive in these areas. More specifically, 21 out of 27 of the countries that we studied received higher than a 3 rating for capacity. And then out of the same 21, almost all of them were able to produce high quality goods. And furthermore, 23 out of 27 countries, or roughly 85%, received greater than a 3 rating for price and tariff. Just goes to show that we have a lot of options that can fulfill our demands for these 3 criteria. And then thirdly, and conversely, there aren't as many countries that are able to provide that financial and political stability. Nearly half of the 27 sourcing destinations were flagged as financially vulnerable or considered highly politically unstable. And less than a third of them received ratings higher than a 3 in sustainability as well, which really encompasses labor conditions and other ethicality concerns, which are definitely hot topics as of late. As for the regression analysis, we put together a little table here and want to draw your attention to a couple of the columns and the cells. So first of all, for price and tariff, as you can see, there is no significant impact across the board. And that kind of ties into what we were talking about in the beginning, where costs don't really have a significant impact on sourcing value or export value because a lot of sourcing destinations are already very cost competitive. Secondly, stability is a significant factor in the US and Asia, where you can see that positive impact that is bolded in those 2 columns. So that's basically telling us that if you are more stable, you're going to get more exports to the US and Asia. It's something that they prioritize a little bit higher. And then sustainability, which I think was definitely the most shocking finding here, had a negative impact both globally and across the 3 regions that we studied, which is saying that if you're more sustainable, it doesn't mean that you're going to get more sourcing orders. And this seems a little bit counterintuitive considering how much of a buzzword sustainability has become in the industry, and definitely raises a lot of concern about greenwashing and how far we still have to go in making sustainability a deal breaker in sourcing decisions. Implications. So we also highlighted 3 of those for you here. The first is that fashion companies' sourcing destinations today appear to be a lot more complicated and subtle than what is revealed by existing literature. So maybe where there was once a time where cost was kind of the bottom line and the be all, there are so many other things that are going into that formula and making it a lot more complex than maybe it was prior. But I do think that it would be interesting to reconduct this study, considering there is a lot of turmoil happening in the sourcing landscape right now with the gridlock on the West Coast, a lot of issues getting goods from certain countries, costing going up. So it would be interesting to conduct this study and see if maybe our findings would be a little bit more different um, in that regard. Secondly, the findings present differing views regarding how sourcing cost and sustainability affect fashion companies' selection of sourcing destinations. We talked about this on the last slide, but sustainability is not really being prioritized as many people would assume, or maybe companies are letting their consumers on to believe. So we really have to start a discussion around what incentives are going to be needed to make sustainability more important and what needs to be brought to the table to do so. And then finally, it kind of calls to our attention the significant impact of non-economic factors on company sourcing decisions. So in particular, the political risks that are being posed. Companies are definitely becoming increasingly sensitive to non-economic factors like forced labor, which is a hot topic in the industry, and they strive to maintain their images and partner with suppliers in politically sound regions to do so. As for future research that could be conducted on the topic, again, like I mentioned, we could conduct the exact same study now and see if maybe the weightings and the ratings would be a little bit different. I think that would definitely be an interesting way to extend upon what we learned. Secondly, continuing to interpret and decode fashion company sourcing strategies in the post-COVID world. We are definitely in a crazy time right now, an unprecedented time. So as post-COVID continues to pan out and we start to kind of see everything resettle, it's something to keep track of is how sourcing strategies are changing. And then finally, exploring whether fashion companies apply different sourcing strategies and criteria to specific apparel product categories. So maybe they're weighting capacity more heavily in women's tops and price or quality more in bottoms. So that could be one way to apply that, or maybe even raw materials versus finished goods. Are we seeing any discrepancies there? That would definitely be interesting to look into. So thank you so much for listening to the presentation today. If you have any other questions or want to get in contact with me, my information is up here on the slide, as well as my professors, Sheng Lu on the left-hand side. And again, just thank you so much for listening. I hope that you learned something and that you really enjoyed.